Thank you all for your time with us here today. We're here to talk about, MENA EdTech sleeping giant or not. The global EdTech landscape has seen many dawns before, but it seems to be finally having its moment, not least because of the ongoing pandemic. The global leaders in EdTech span practically every region of the world, with one notable piece on that map missing, which is MENA. Our speakers today are maybe part of an effort to change that and are going to try to convince us that that's about to change. MENA's demographics, of course, are very favorable for EdTech companies. You have over 100 million school-aged students with a general, population pyramid tilted toward youth. In parallel, growing internet smartphone penetration, huge interest in education and spending on education across the entire region. But on the flip side, there's still a lot sorely missing. It's a fragmented market with varying legislation, overly centralized systems of education, poor digital payments infrastructure, and the list goes on. But hopefully, by the end of this panel, our guests will convince you that that's all surmountable and they're all challenges that we can overcome together. Amir, you're a seasoned investor across MENA, across different sectors. You're doing more and more work in EdTech today. So let's start with you. As an investor in the space, with your unique perspective, what do you think needs to be true for MENA to create the next EdTech unicorn?
Yeah, look, thanks, Nafez. Thanks for having me today. I think I'm not an EdTech specialist, so I have to caveat that. So what I do is, I run a VC called COTU Ventures, and we invest at the seed stage in companies. You have one of your panelists, Omar, who I've backed at the firm. But when I look at EdTech in the past 10 years in the region, I think it's been a bit early for me when in my prior firm we had not invested in any EdTech plays, and I think the reason for that is that the adoption curve at least was still small, and the educational institutions here are slow to adopt technology. There's the sales cycle to service these institutions were and still are very, very long. And now with this whole shift, at least accelerated significantly by COVID, people are ready to consume content and learn online, both in live formats and also through unique proprietary curriculums that are designed for the personalized learning experience. In the past, you could see, selling to schools as was the business model. Today, I think selling to parents is, and so you disintermediate that particular challenge. And so now with that empowering the parent, you're finding actually, if you look at some statistics, I think I noted an article by Andreessen Horowitz. They say that in the past, schools would spend $250 a year per student. And today, parents spend $700 a year per student on digital gadgets, anything that helps them learn, right? So that shift in spend is just, I think, created a huge market opportunity, and that exists, I think, on a global level, let alone MENA. So what I'd like to see, and I think once monetization actually takes hold in this particular segment, where parents are given the right tools to pay and for their children or for their kids to learn, I think that can really open up a huge opportunity where you can see MENA unicorns emerging. If I had stopped there, but can go on and talk about other things around that. But yeah.
Perfect. Tala, moving on to you. You also have a unique vantage point as well at the Crown Prince's Court in Abu Dhabi, and historically government has been the biggest spender, certainly in MENA. In education, what is your role, at the CPC, maybe even speaking as a public sector, in helping support this thesis put forward by Amir to really nurture EdTech, innovation EdTech startups across the region?
Thank you, Nafez, and it's great to be here as part of this esteemed panel. Amir put forward very interesting points on the EdTech landscape in the region, which is quite new and growing, though with COVID, everything has changed and accelerated, not just in this region, but globally. You mentioned earlier in your introduction, there are around 100 million school-age students, and those were the number of students that were out of school for a while during peak lockdown. And for me as a mother as well, watching how quickly schools were able to adapt to this hybrid learning model and looking at some of the platforms that what my son was using through remote learning, teach your monster how to read and phonics bugs and whatnot, I really realized how much of an opportunity there is to create an ecosystem for more EdTech platforms from the region, for the region, and especially in Arabic, which was something that was quite lacking for us for a very long time here. But also as a policy maker, one of the most important policy themes for us in the UAE particularly, and even before COVID hit, was how do we create an innovation and knowledge-based economy in a post-oil world, and much more recently in a post-COVID world. And a large part of this thinking meant creating an enabling environment for the growth of the private sector, a private sector that is diversified, that is tech-driven, and that is innovative. And the UAE for many years has been working very hard to deregulate the SME sector, to allow for this ecosystem to flourish, to allow SMEs to set up, to get access to funding, and eventually to grow and become the next unicorns for our region. For the UAE particularly, I think that we have a very unique challenge within the country that we had to deal with from a labor market perspective, was that UAE nationals did not want to join the private sector or become entrepreneurs. Statistics from 2017 indicated that around 80% of employed UAE nationals work for the federal or local governments. So this has been quite a unique challenge to us. And how do we create create opportunities for Emiratis to join the private sectors or want to become entrepreneurs? One of the reasons they weren't doing so is that the benefits and financial compensation within government was quite generous in the UAE particularly. But the UAE and Abu Dhabi more specifically has been trying to address that through alleviating or closing that gap between the public and private sector when it comes to wage and benefits. But of course, I mean, many of the panelists here are may have been for some time, long-time residents of the UAE. So the SME sector is not driven just by UAE nationals. You have many new or long-time residents that live here that face many challenges in the SME sector or have faced for many years, including high startup costs, which make it extremely difficult for smaller businesses to enter the market. But also, I think, much more seriously, the lack of bankruptcy laws that make it hard for pre-existing companies to fail. And we know many SMEs fail in the first few years. So making sure that we can address some of the challenges within the ecosystem is important. And I'll stop at that, and maybe we can have a follow-up conversation on some of these issues.
Perfect. Thank you, Tala. Hamdi, moving to you. I think you and I literally had coffee February 2020. You were telling me Abwaab is about to go live. Little did we know that the entire world was about to change by the time I got on my flight back to London. So Hamdi, from your perspective, as somebody that's really, been part of the EdTech response to COVID, what are the lessons you've learned from Abwaab? And maybe specifically talk to us about, this question of, is the K-12 market a single market? If you're an EdTech entrepreneur in MENA, is MENA a market, or are there multiple markets within MENA, and how do you guys at Abwaab go about that? So multiple points, please feel free to really take it the direction that makes the most sense to you.
Yeah, of course. And I just want to say it's very good to be back at the ASU+GSV Summit as like winners of last year's GSV Cup. Is just an amazing milestone for us. And I've been seeing the startups that are coming at the short list that's been there. And I mean, a lot of exciting EdTech startups coming up. Obviously, there's a lot to be done on the EdTech side, which I think is a good segue to looking at the MENA market. And just to answer or like to tackle your first question about single market localization, different countries operating in one region. If you look at the region from like the greater region of MENA, Pakistan, let's say, where most of the startups are operating, there's 160 million students across. And there are similarities, but there are also a lot of differences. I think if we look at the similarities, it would be as Tala mentioned, a lot of dependence on after-school tutoring, parents trying their best to provide with their kids with supplementary learning solutions to get through school and have a good career. So I think in that sense, as you look at it, is very, very similar. Now, when it comes to solving that problem through technology as an EdTech startup, there are differences, and I can name a few. If you think of the language and the dialect, and for anyone hearing this from outside of the region, Arabic is the formal language from Morocco to the UAE and Oman. But if a Moroccan is speaking the local dialect to someone from Dubai, they probably wouldn't understand each other at all. So there needs to be a lot of localization to be able to deliver the best quality learning experience for students. And we've seen a lot of startups that came out of the region do very, very well at that, and localizing the experience for their users to make the most out of it. If you want to look at the academic side, while you would think that maths, for example, is just like similar concepts being shared everywhere, different curricula are curricula across the countries are not really structured the same. Some topics are covered while others are not. Some things are learned in grade 9 in certain countries, where in others are learned in grade 11. And it goes on. I mean, like in some countries, grade 9 is the detrimental grade because it gets you to choose like your stream, whether it's like commerce, science, or art stream. And then in other countries, it's only about the last year of school, where you see a lot of families and parents and students giving a lot of priority to that year. So to solve the problem to solve this very similar problem across the region, I believe that an EdTech startup needs to understand the locality, which is something we have at Abwaab. We're operating today in Jordan and Egypt, Iraq, and Saudi, and we've just set up an operation in Pakistan as well. Yeah, we believe that to deliver the best experience to students, it needs to be as localized as possible.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Hamdi. Omar, moving to you. Obviously, at Inglees, I think you're working at a very, very interesting problem that's relevant to millions of learners across the region. Like at Idrak, I remember the one course that almost brought the site down was when we offered free English language learning, which was ironic for a website focused on original Arabic content. But in the same vein, for you, Omar, is there a regional market for English language learning? What are the challenges? What do investors that you talk to need to understand about why Inglees is an exciting opportunity?
First of all, thank you so much for this opportunity. As Hamdi mentioned, they won it last year. We're really hoping to win it this year. So whoever's watching this, please do vote. So just to kind of quickly highlight the importance of English proficiency. Inglees started on the back of a bad social media post I made dismissing the need and the importance of English. This is how it all started. That went viral, a couple of thousand people telling me how crazy I was. And for me, the switch wasn't so much that, I was annoying or offending people. It was essentially, it really touched at a core of someone's actual confidence, especially if we're talking adult education. Taking a step back, looking at the region, and I think previously to the call, we talked about the problem we're solving, not just English proficiency, it's tourism, it's economic diversity, it's employment. The number one driver of employability in the MENA region is English proficiency. Yet the MENA region has the world's lowest English proficiency rate worldwide. And if you look at the World Bank figures, the MENA region has had the highest youth unemployment 25 years running. And we're not talking about just pockets across the MENA region. We're talking across the entire region. Obviously, one of the youngest populations on earth, that becomes a massive problem. And so when we set out and when we started to basically analyze the needs, and as you said, almost about your site down, it was the same thing for us. When we actually started testing out the interest for that, it was phenomenal. And obviously, looking at not just the size of the market, but what's going on across the market. So when we're talking about employment, this is the individuals. But then you're looking at the diversification that's going on from Saudi to the UAE to multi-markets, where they want to bring in private investments. They want to encourage their citizens to join private companies. English proficiency is an absolute need. IBM is not going to hire you if you don't actually communicate in English properly, be it in Saudi, UAE, or wherever. Then you start looking at tourism and the infrastructure that's being built around there. If you want to actually support tourism, which globally takes up 1 out of every 11 jobs, directly or indirectly, English proficiency is a massive need in that space. And then obviously, when you're starting to look at the individual and their growth, I wrote an article in the Entrepreneur magazine talking about the bias of communication skills. That is a bias we all know. That is a bias that none of us actually will deny, nor can we actually help it, which is if you communicate well, you come across smarter. That fact is real across society, and that actually gives you the ability to grow way faster than someone else who might be more intelligent and more capable, but not able to communicate as well. And I think addressing those massive gaps on an individual level and obviously societal level will yield great benefits to the MENA region.
Amazing. That's really, I'd say, a very powerful picture you're painting, Omar. And we'll come back to both you and Hamdi in a bit to like really understand, what's next for you guys. Amir, circling back to you, you talked about the importance of maybe disintermediating some of the current, purchasing sales cycles, selling directly to schools, being able to sell instead directly to parents. I guess in that light, and maybe even beyond that, what specific sectors in MENA EdTech would you say you were most excited about, and why?
Yeah, look, I'm gonna maybe paint a picture of like a future world, and then think about how that relates to maybe the sectors, because I don't necessarily look at things in that level, but you look at the passion economy now, the creator economy, right, and how that's literally empowering everyone to go and monetize their time and their skills and their knowledge, right? I think the same shift is going to happen to teachers. Everyone can become a teacher. Everyone can actually go in with their domain expertise, go and actually start monetizing it through technology. That's a shift that's going to enable everybody very soon, in my opinion, in the next, let's say, decade, to be able to like contribute, right? Combine that with, so that's a whole space. What that looks like and what sectors and how people solve for that is going to be interesting. In Omar's case, on a basic level, he's allowing English teachers to basically monetize their time and their skills teaching English online. But there's so many other use cases that can emerge from that. I think the other thing that is interesting is this wave of digital adoption. So if you think of like kids today, they're so ingrained in the digital world that it's their life. Like half of their life is spent online. So the future institution is going to be a digital institution that has offline elements versus an offline institution that has digital elements. And so who's building for that world, how they do it? It's through community-based learning, cohort-based learnings online where you build digital communities, but then you interact offline through activity. There's all these interesting dimensions that EdTech can play. And I think in our region, it can be even more prevalent, especially because of the fragmentation of MENA. So those are a couple of points that I'm passionate about. But then in general, I think once you figure out how to capture the parent, I still stick with that because I think that's only become apparent now to parents how they can really help educate their kids. And then obviously on the flip side with adults, it's more how do you reskill and upskill people, because that reskilling is such a huge need as technology basically disrupts a lot of these industries. And all of these can be adjusted or disrupted or even solved for through technology solutions that we have yet to see, but I'm really excited about finding.
Thank you, Amir. Yeah, and then I think you bring up a lot of interesting points, but maybe most salient for me is this idea that before COVID, maybe not a lot of us just saw how our kids were learning, how they were studying, weren't experiencing education as sort of maybe directly. And unfortunately, I think there is a larger and wider conversation now being had about representation diversity within the entrepreneurship state, but it's usually, middle-aged, white or white-passing men as entrepreneurs. And I think that they're usually people that don't have kids, haven't been thinking about EdTech as much. But I think now finally, a lot of really, really smart people, obviously like many on this panel, are starting to direct their attention, their energies, and their resources towards what I think is the most important challenges that we face as a society. Turning to you, Tala, you talked about this a bit in terms of getting more Emiratis into sort of these exciting sectors, these exciting jobs, supporting SMEs. Maybe if we dig a bit, maybe we're focused a bit more on incentivizing growth in educational innovation or in the EdTech ecosystem, specifically in the UAE. Obviously, I mean, there are a few EdTech startups in Abu Dhabi, like Lamsa, like Elif, and sort of others that are now, maybe pioneering models for the region. What is the UAE doing? What is Abu Dhabi doing to, continue to nurture, support, and attract these startups to the UAE?
Yeah, thank you, Nafez. I mean, you mentioned a few of the EdTech startups that are actually based in Hub 71, which is a new platform or global tech hub that was set up by Mubadala, which is one of the largest state-owned holding companies and sovereign wealth funds globally. And they've been providing very generous plans to encourage people to become entrepreneurs, but also to move to Abu Dhabi to set up their businesses here. So Mubadala set up Hub 71 quite recently and provides this very generous incentive program that alleviates the cost of setting up and living in Abu Dhabi. They also provide an interconnected tech ecosystem backed by multinational partners that Mubadala itself works with across the globe, and also provides access to capital and market opportunities for these startups. Some specific, support that I would mention that Hub 71, for example, provides is providing seed stage startups with free housing, office space, and health insurance for all the employees of that selected startup, while they provide emergent stage startup with 50% subsidies for 3 years on housing, office space, and health insurance. So these are quite generous opportunities for potential entrepreneurs or startups that want to move to the UAE. And I think just more generally, incentivizing growth for the EdTech sector is a parallel journey to incentivizing growth for tech startups more broadly within the UAE and the region. And many of these startups obviously aim to serve the wider region and not just the UAE in particular. But I think also one of, from a public policy level as well, is how do you reduce some of the barriers to entry for these tech startups? If you're not part of Hub 71, how can you enter the market and grow as an entrepreneur and as an SME within the region? So the UAE has been doing a lot on that front, and you'll see that reflected in many of the newer indicators that are coming out on ease of doing business, etc., where the UAE ranks quite highly there, both from a regional perspective, but a global perspective as well. And just last year, actually, the UAE cabinet named and appointed a Minister of State for Entrepreneurship and SMEs, which is the first time they've done that in the country. And I think that's a very strong signal that the UAE is prioritizing the private sector and SMEs as a major driver of the country's growth. You see as well many new financial free zones, such as ADGM, Abu Dhabi Global Markets, that have made it much easier for companies to set up here. And you don't have to be an Emirati. In the past, there were very stringent restrictions about setting up a business, including partnership with a UAE national, and many of those restrictions have been removed or have been eased up for people who want to set up companies here, as well as some of the costly requirements for smaller businesses, such as requiring a physical office space for you to even establish your business. Many of these requirements have dropped or have eased for particular types of businesses, which has made it much easier for companies to set up shop here. I think, one of the bigger questions as well, once you set up, how can you create the ecosystem for these companies to grow? I was looking at not a startling statistic, it's not that surprising, but less than 3% of unicorn companies worldwide are based in the region. But I think that's changing for sure. You see a lot of startups that are setting up and growing from within the region instead of having to leave the region to become successful. And I think one of the most important parts of this equation as well, and probably not talked about enough, is how do you destigmatize failure for entrepreneurs, especially here? Probably many of you have been connected to Silicon Valley in some way, and over there, it's a badge of honor to fail at some point in your entrepreneurship journey. And obviously, there's some culture of shame associated with failing here, but I think much more importantly, how do you tackle the serious public policy constraints that make it hard or incredibly costly to fail as a business owner in this part of the world? And this is where things like rewriting or reconsidering bankruptcy laws and company dissolution laws needs to be tackled within the UAE. But I think, I'm pleasantly surprised and encouraged by the changes happening within the UAE and the wider region when it comes to creating this enabling ecosystem. So I think there's a lot that can be done, but there's a lot that is being done as well to make sure that entrepreneurs succeed and grow and create the next unicorns here.
Thank you so much, Tala. And then I guess on that note of trying, striving, and then potentially failing, and then maybe eventually succeeding, would love to hear from the entrepreneurs on the panel. So Hamdi, going to what's next for Abwaab? What should we expect? What are you looking forward to in the coming years? I know it's been a roller coaster already, but hopefully, there's a lot more to come for us to expect.
Yeah, roller coaster, just to say the least. Look, I mean, Abwaab is here to essentially provide students in the K-12 segment with access to affordable and high quality education. And we always say that our vision is to unleash the human potential of the region. And we believe that this is done by providing the best education. Considering myself as an Uber graduate, Travis always used to say that we need to make, excuse me, I think this is just from my end. Yeah. Travis always used to say that we wanted to make mobility and ride sharing as reliable as running water. And while running water is not as reliable in the region, but if you just take the gist of it, the concept is the same for us. I mean, step one as Abwaab, we're just focused on building a solid infrastructure for students to learn from in a reliable manner by learning and getting assessed through concept lessons and continuous assessments as we expand across the region. I think the second part of it is Amir was talking about cohort-based learning, and this is a very interesting concept. And if you come to think about it, when you learn at school, it's essentially cohort-based learning, but then how do you take that experience online? And a lot of what we're going to do is going to be around that, whether it's allowing students to learn in communities, compete with each other, interact, socialize, and allowing our community of teachers and teacher assistants as well to be able to provide support and essentially like support and tutoring to students on the Abwaab platform. So a lot is coming up. We believe that the successful EdTech startup on the long term will be one that is providing an overall ecosystem for students that allows them to experience all of that in their cohort and in their communities by learning, but also enjoying their learning experience and seeing how their peers are performing and kind of competing with them and socializing as they go throughout the journey. So a lot is happening, a lot of investment on the tech and product side to make that dream a reality. And we feel that we have a very strong team to put us on track to do that. So just very, very excited for the years to come. I think we've just gotten started.
Thank you, Hamdi. Omar, turning to you, I mean, really same question. I think, an equally, sizable demographic and an equally sizable challenge to fix that statistic that, I mean, I'm also very familiar with, the fact that MENA is one of the lowest regions globally in terms of English proficiency. So yeah, please, what's next for English? What are the sort of the next milestones and challenges that you're hoping to overcome over the coming months and years?
Sorry about that. So I think for us, what's the most exciting part is obviously establishing ourselves within the region. Our vision is to be global leaders in synchronous learning. We want to be able to offer live classes anytime a student wants, with the teacher they like, in the classroom chemistry they want, and learn the way they want to learn in a synchronous manner at scale. That's not exactly something easy to kind of achieve. And I think that's what will make this journey exciting and valuable. But for us, in the grand scheme of things, we need to look at it globally. There's over 1.7 billion people trying to learn English every single year. That's more than K-12 to higher education combined. And so tackling that, starting with the region and understanding the different dynamics in the region, and Hamdi alluded to that earlier in terms of localization, and really making sure that we not only understand how to make sure that the content is localized, but deliver it in a way that constantly drives those intrinsic motivators for someone to actually show up to class and deliver, especially if you're looking at the adult education space, where it's a lot less obligatory and a lot more as an option for them. So over the next few months and I guess few years, it would be to establish ourselves within the region for synchronous learning, specifically focusing on English proficiency. And I think obviously starting to look at tackling English proficiency at a global scale for other mother tongues would be perhaps something that we will be looking at 3 to 5 years out.
Amazing. Perfect. No, thank you so much for that, Omar. Amir, circling back to you and maybe taking a bit of a macro view here, with EdTech and even beyond EdTech, just talking about MENA, in your conversations maybe with investors that are not based in MENA, what's maybe, the number one thing or the most important thing that you are trying to get them to understand about why MENA EdTech is, an exciting and up and coming space?
Yeah, look, I think for me, it's a couple of things. It's generally challenging for one to have healthy unit economics in this sector, in part because it's generally been difficult to monetize. And so when you speak to outside investors, that becomes a debate that's very hard to build conviction around. And so what excites me is, again, I don't want to sound like a parrot here, but I mean, the idea of like using the parent and really monetizing or showing how the actual ARPU of that particular audience is really significant, especially in places like the GCC, where you have some of the highest spend per users in certain categories, from healthcare, education, obviously travel and other things, right? So I think it's a lot more presenting that case, and we have yet, I mean, there will be examples of this, but that's what's emerging right now, is a lot of these EdTech companies that exist in the region are entering into this understanding of how can we really monetize this at scale. Once we have 1 or 2 success stories, hopefully the panelists will do that, then the case becomes clear for the region as an investment opportunity. I think until then, it'll always have this sort of question mark.
No, I mean, amazing. And I think maybe to pull on that thread of a success story, at least Hamdi, I know we've spoken about this before. I mean, I think sometimes when we talk about EdTech sectors, et cetera, on a macro scale, we forget that behind these numbers are, learners and stories of success and impact. So Hamdi, maybe to go to you, is there a specific story of, somebody that's used Abwaab that's where it's really, impacted or sort of changed their life? There's one that you've shared with me that comes to mind. I think about the colleague or the sister of a colleague on your team, but I'm sure there may be others where sort of Abwaab has made a marked difference on their lives. And I know we have a few more minutes, and I'd also like to go to Omar if there's any success story you would like to share.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, there are a lot. There was this one where like one of the ladies on our team, her sister just like didn't really like learning online, and she's like always looking for offline support. And she was like, her sister was working at Abwaab, but she always refused to learn on Abwaab. And then when the school year started, she just started using it, and she was kind of like a C student. And she adopted the platform very, very seriously. And at the end of the year, I just like, we get a forwarded message from this lady on the team saying, look, guys, my sister has been learning on Abwaab for the whole year, and she just scored like really, really well. I think it was somewhere in the range of an A. She's just thanking us so much, saying that it was a great experience. And I think this just says a lot about awareness and use that needs to be developed by students and parents to understand the value and importance of learning on Abwaab, or EdTech in general, actually. But yeah, Abwaab specifically.
I mean, to take a broader EdTech perspective, Omar, I mean, are there any stories that you would like to share with us?
Yeah,
I mean, I just know how learning English can be transformational.
Absolutely. For us, it's I would kind of club it in three major stories. So a couple of days ago, I was on Sabah Al-Khair Arab on NBC, and I was saying that it's never too late to learn the language. Our oldest student was 69. Little did I know, someone called me on my French number and wanted to enroll after the interview. I don't know how they got my number, but they're 75 years old. He's a 75-year-old Emirati doctor that's actually enrolled with us and starting to take on classes. The second one for us is, and this we get this reverberated across all of our student body, is a lot of the comments is almost self-deprecating in terms of like, I really feel stupid. I didn't think it was going to be that easy to learn the language. Right? Like we get comments like this literally on a daily, where we've simplified learning the language so much, and that a lot of these guys that are 38 or 28 or 25 that are in the middle of their careers feel like it's too late for them. And all of a sudden they send us a message in English, fluent English almost, to a point where it almost feels staged. I shared one of the messages with Amir. He goes, who gave him the script? I'm like, dude, none of us. He just sent us that. So that was obviously very fulfilling. But I think what that really hits home for me, besides the comments that I'm getting from my personal followers on social media, which is where it all started, is people constantly sending us messages that they got the job that they wanted, they got the promotion that they wanted, they got a raise that they wanted, and so on and so forth. It's really like driving that direct impact on their lives every single day, which again all started with me dismissing the importance of the language. And so that for me, it's that 180 has been a phenomenal journey. But just kind of the last little point I wanted to make is COVID normalized education technology, normalized learning online. What a lot of people are missing is that they also, obviously, what everybody would agree is that COVID normalized working remotely. Do you understand, with 56% of the internet is in English, 6% is in Russian, working remotely being normalized opens the doors to the world. It allows someone that's sitting in the UAE, that's a great designer, to basically submit work and work full-time for a company that's in Texas and so on and so forth. That normalization of working remotely is something we're insanely excited about. And that not only we have over 100 team members that are working remotely and earning, but that's actually empowering a lot of our students to actually apply for jobs abroad and get hired remotely as well.
Thank you so much, Omar, for that. And I think that's a secular trend that I think is going to be very, very interesting to monitor around the world. And as the world maybe doesn't become flat, but becomes sort of smaller and sort of more connected. Thank you, everybody, for your time here today. Obviously, I think MENA is EdTech's sleeping giant. You heard it here first at the GSV Summit. You heard it from these wonderful panelists, and we hope you enjoyed this session.